Well, thank you all for coming. And being more allowing and just comfortable with it and being present with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I went to his class just a couple times. But yeah, this was the satsang that we did with Timothy once a week was a lot different. It wasn't a lot of head stuff.
Yeah.
Every once in a while you get on a certain topic, but it was mainly about it. Our satsangs were just establishing a stillness at the beginning with a half-hour meditation.
Yeah, he often would say something like, you have to be ripe for talking. You have to have that stillness to prepare you for the talking, so that the talking isn't scattered, so the talking has more focus to it, you know. So it's but it's not just a matter of being present in order to enrich the experience. That's important. But there's even another aspect that's often overlooked. I've never really heard anyone talk about it right exactly in this context. But it's recognizing that when you're present, there's a continual recognition that you are this open awareness that's holding all of this phenomena that's arising. And that there's this eternal, unchanging, open awareness that you are fundamentally. And this is the deepest truth that comes from being present with it. Of course, you are a soul and a body in the sense that those are constructions, and that is how you will usually think of yourself, but they're constructions. And so before the construction is this pure open awareness. This is this transcendent reality, this capital R, formless, invisible in every way, imperceptible. This is you. And it arises through this miracle of creation. It comes forward through the miracle of creation, which we're not here to explain. We're here to stand in awe and wonder of this miracle. And while that is true, there is this how of the miracle, the why of the miracle. I have nothing to say about those. No one really does. But there's a little bit about the what of the miracle that we can put on the table. And this is what I try to do with the verbiage that I put on the table. And this is very much like the scientists do. The scientists, they talk, and here I'm talking about, say, physics, and let's take the most famous physics equation that I know of. This won't be hard. E equals mc squared, Einstein's famous equation. Well, what is in this equation? It's talking about time, space, energy, and matter. It's all wrapped up in that equation. What is that equation? It's a description about what. But if you ask the scientists about what time really is, and you want a deep philosophical answer that goes all the way to the core of it, you won't find that answer. But they can still measure time and put it in an equation. They can't really tell you what space really is, but they can measure it and put it into an equation. And similar things can be said about energy and matter. They can be measured and put into an equation. And this is what the scientists do. And these equations give them a practical understanding of the miracle and mystery of what they see around them. And the best ones of them acknowledge the miracle and mystery as just awesome and mysterious. And so, what I am doing with the verbiage about God and creation is letting the mystery be the mystery, and yet still putting a sliver of verbiage on the table that's practical, that will help you deal with the world around you and help you see how you can tap into that flow and live from this open awareness that you are. So, any comments on any of that?
I sense there's a very much eternal presence that is all love. However, I've been indoctrinated in a lot of New Age, all oneness, and it's all very, and I see life has a lot of pain in it.
Yes,
times,
exactly.
and that's denied and not, in my experience, when painful things in my life aren't addressed and understood and restored.
Yes, right.
There's a lot of repressed stuff that comes up later on in some way, and I don't want to live that way. I just came from hospice. I'm a hospice volunteer worker at Serenity House and a number of places, but I also work at a retreat center. I have trouble when things, in fact, I just wrote a little comment to our pastor here because there's this all oneness, we're all, and I have trouble with that because life has painful places in it, in my experience. And
Absolutely.
there is a lack of my ability sometimes to speak up and say the truth and be vulnerable about it, because it's not going to be, I have to take a risk, and I would rather not. So I hear what you're saying, that yes, it's all, there is that basic core of eternity, but in the human condition, we're not here as, it's just, there is stuff to go through from birth to death that sometimes isn't all just great.
Yes, and this is the most difficult question that any philosophy has to address. Pain and suffering. If there is a God, why would God allow these things to happen, these difficult things to example?
I think it's the human condition. We're imperfect.
Well, the important thing for everyone is for themselves to find a posture or a handle or a perspective that's comfortable for them and works for them. So just because what I put on the table, that seems to be a good match for the way I work with the world, isn't meant to be, and you will be happy too when you do it my way. And here's my way, right? So just because I'm going to say some things about this doesn't mean that your perspective is being not honored, or you know what I'm saying, right? So some of the things that people sometimes think of when they hear the idea of oneness is that God is the source of everything that's good. And there is no consideration for, well, where does all the bad come from? Because we clearly see that there's comfortable and uncomfortable, kindness and less than kind, helping and harmful, good and evil. All of these things are arising in the world. And so some people misunderstand this this phrase, non-dual wisdom, to mean that good and evil are the same, or that they don't exist, or that one of them exists and the other one doesn't. Do you see what I mean? This wisdom is proclaiming God to be the source of all of it. All of it. Everything that we consider good and evil.
I don't believe that.
That's why I'm saying that you don't have to buy what I'm putting on the table.
Evil forces
I didn't say that there aren't.
that have nothing to do
See,
with God.
see, okay, I'm glad you put that last phrase on, because there are honored in the non-dual perspective good and evil. It's not that we say that there isn't evil, and we work for good, but we see it all as coming from the one source, ultimately this one source. And we don't see any flaws in creation, but we see it as just this polishing of the world as it's come forward to working towards something better. So if you happen to be in a place that's most comfortable for you, saying, I see the good and I see the evil, and you obviously want to work for the good, right? So you step into that role, and you embrace it as best you can, and you work for wherever you're at, and you're in a very high place of service. You're dealing with loss quite a bit, right? Because in hospice, you're making connections, and then these people pass. And so you deal with family members, right? And so forth. So,
and it's not just hospice. I'm in a retreat center where people come to be still because they need time to be unstressed and be still, because they are so busy all the time. They don't know they haven't had a chance to really be in their true self, because they're, our culture has demands, and financially, for most people, they do things they may or may not be within their limits, and find out who their real self is, and they can do it when they don't have the pressure to perform, or that's out of their limits. That's why people retreat.
Yeah.
So
people come there like for a week or more.
2 days to a week. So, and there are many retreat centers all over that offer that recharge and renewal.
So are you there as like a counselor or something?
No, I'm a host, and I help the chef, and I do the flower arrangement, so different, and I interact with the guests at dinner. Yeah. So I hear a lot of conversations, people from all walks of life, and usually they are in some caring or caregiving or professional role of caring for people. So
right.
they need to do some self-care.
Yeah. And one of the things that comes to mind for me is the serenity prayer. And that's helpful for people that even have never heard of non-duality. The prayer, people that are really into non-duality might even criticize me for bringing this prayer up, because it starts off with, God grant me. And in that phrase, people say, well, you're making a distinction between you and God. And what I say about this is that the prayer is being vocalized by the person from the perspective of the person. But it's being vocalized by the Absolute through the instrument. And therefore, I'm perfectly comfortable with it saying, God grant me the serenity to accept things the way they are. That right there, it's a lot to deal with for people. I'm going to accept this. What does it mean to accept it? It doesn't mean that you're going to encourage it, or it doesn't mean that you're going to stop, quote unquote, working to make it better. I could say working against it. Like, are you going to accept the poverty, injustice, war. It's not like you're going to just say, well, good job with all of that stuff and keep up the good work. No, it's you may be inspired to help bring more peace or more comfort. But in that first part, God grant me the serenity to accept things the way they are. And then there's more. And the courage to change things that I can, right? And the wisdom to know the difference. So you don't end up being like Sisyphus, right? Pushing the rock up the hill and always being frustrated because you're doing work that you can't really complete, right? So you need to learn, and you've probably done this your whole life. You tune in to where can you put in your time? Where can you put in your love? Where can you put in your energy to help make the world a better place? Whether it's appreciated or not, or how it's accepted, maybe not, you can't really say. But I like that prayer, and I think that it can be really helpful because someone that may not feel that the fruit of that prayer has really ripened within them yet, right? So by repeating the prayer, it may help that ripening of that acceptance and that wisdom to know where to apply yourself, and the wisdom to know where not to push the rock up the hill all the time, so
So what do you do in satsang, basically?
Well, it does depend upon who shows up and where their interest lies. And Timothy had a tremendous breadth of material that he could draw from. So if someone came and asked a question from a Buddhist perspective or a Hindu perspective, he could get right down to that. I don't have as broad a knowledge, but I have a plain understanding in simple English of those deeper truths about who you are as this pure awareness. And yet this pure awareness is arising as this person right here. And this is your perspective into the world. And so there's value in this. Ultimately, this is all a play, a dream, but it's a dream that's constructed out of the divine, which is why it's so precious, which is why we don't discount it, which is why we don't trash it. And it's why we joyously contribute in our own way to help it be a better place,
Satsang is basically a teaching, learning, teaching.
Yeah. I call it as, in the online, I refer to it as a spiritual discussion, but I think a more literal translation means meeting in truth. And this truth is often capitalized, pointing to this deep non-dual understanding that God and creation are one reality, not two. This is the not two that's being talked about. It's not so much that we're saying that there isn't good and evil, there isn't hot and cold. It's not that we're saying not two there. There we honor the two as they arise. These dualistic expressions arise in our world. But our world is an emanation of this reality, this formless reality, which is pure awareness. And because it gives birth to all of creation, it's referred to as source awareness. And this is the awareness that's looking out of your eyes right now. This truth is not for everyone, won't resonate with everyone, but perhaps we can find an area of overlap. Well, one thing you mentioned was intimacy. And really deep intimacy comes when, and this may not be where most people are at, but when they understand it's not that you and I are the same, because you are totally unique. You are an absolute, complete, unique expression of this source reality. You're unique. You know you are unique. And yet, this expression that you are flows from this source awareness in such a way that it's fully saturated with this divinity. Everything about you is absolutely, completely divine, and it flows from this place. this unseen reality.
That's true for everyone of us. So
Exactly true for everyone. And this is what brings the intimacy. We look for commonality, and that's really good. That's why these people came to this room, is because there's something in common. And the more of that we do, it can bring us together and help us feel connected. And yet, who you are is this unseen bridge that goes between all. And that can inspire the most fearless, open intimacy and dynamic interaction, because there's no concern of being harmed. You can act from this place because who you are is this reality that can never be damaged. So, anyway.
But when you say who you are, you're saying that you are created by the source, and therefore you are permeated by divinity. But you're still a human being with everything that human beings go through. We're just created by the divine.
The analogy I use many, many times is the actor arising as the character. Who we are as people are characters, but who we truly are is this unseen actor, this completely imperceptible. It's not a person. It's not a super person. It's not the super strong or super spiritual person. Timothy referred to it as a supra person, meaning the source of all persons. This reality is the source of all persons, permeates all persons, animates all persons, dissolves all persons, transcends all persons. This is who you truly are in your most natural reality. But there is an arising construction. Who you are as a soul and who you are as a body is an arising construction. So it's dependent upon this transcendent reality, which is you as source awareness. You know you are aware, but most people think that they are a thing or a being that is aware. What this truth offers is not that you are a sentient being, but you are sentience itself. Now, when I heard these ideas presented by a very good teacher, I did not go, wow, that's incredible, or wow, thanks for telling me, now I see, or oh, now that you've explained it to me, I got it. It was very puzzling. It's so different from how we look at ourselves and the world. When I first heard it, it was, this sounds interesting. I'm going to think about this, and I'm going to come back next week and listen some more. And there were others that were also coming back every week. But there generally was a dynamic interplay of who came and who went. But it's definitely not something that is easily assimilated. And some of the things that really stick as you try to swallow it down, it's like, God is the source of evil? How can this be? I've never heard such a thing. How can this be?
That's true.
How can it be? Where did it come from? And then, of course,
so you think God's the source of evil?
God is the source of everything.
I'm sorry, I draw a line there.
And where does it come from? Where did it come from?
There are two forces in life. In my experience, there's the light and there's not the light. And
or you could call it the darkness.
And where did the light and not the light come from?
I think that's a mystery that is not something I can answer.
Yeah. And this is the very common.
I don't claim to have that understanding. I didn't create me. God, I didn't create myself.
The person did not. The person did not create the person. The character did not create the character.
did not have boundaries, and that trust to be open with people and let anything come up. We're finding that a lot of vets and a lot of men who've had addictions, whether it's sex or substance, they have a lot of repressed stuff that in the end is what's all showing up, because they were very good at controlling all of it through life, but then it just tilt. It's very interesting. We're discovering that in order to really feel safe, that it's okay to cry, it's okay to be mad, it's okay to have emotions, and then that heals.
Yeah.
But when it's all like, there's just something, I'm trying to find more real, I guess, I don't know why I have this. I guess it's just a trusting, ongoing relationship that acknowledges people both ways of where we're at. I think that's I haven't quite found that balance of I thou, where that seems to, I don't know,
But you're,
ideologies.
but I think you're nurturing that which is wholesome within you in a way that is good and helps you flower. You don't have to go to this length that I talk about where you see God as the source of evil. If that's not working for you, what does work for you? What does make you flower? And you know what it is. You know it's being with people.
I think it's something holy. And there's no
holy
evil in
and
that. You can't have evil in holiness.
Holy and wholesome.
Yeah, it doesn't have evil in it. That's something. It's interesting where if there is something that's not the light, it's interesting to ponder. Well, where did that come from?
Yeah, but you don't have to ponder that. If it doesn't, if you don't see any reconciliation there, then why spend time there?
No, I guess I was naive before, and now I see that I'm to resist anything that's darkness. And say, no, thank you.
Exactly.
And go, I don't.
Yeah, now there's a way of saying, no, thank you. And there's also, I gotta fight you. And if you move into this place where it's just like, this isn't for me, I'm gonna be over here, and I'm just gonna be myself. Because God works through you in a way that is going to feel good and help your heart be open and interactive. You don't have to worry about whether it's going to be some kind of torturous path to who you are supposed to flower into, you know?
Thank you. I realize that now.
And then I don't know how old I was, but later I started reading the books by Jane Roberts, the Seth materials. And I read those for a while, and I went, wow, those are really interesting. I didn't read all of them because there are a lot of them, and they're very hard for me to read. They're very deep. And then, I don't know, I just kind of cruised around for a while, and then eventually I found Timothy, and about 11 years ago, I started to go to the weekly meetings at Timothy Conway's. And so that was when it really, he was the first one that explained, you've heard forever that you are divine. I had heard for 25 years, you are divine. But it was Timothy that was the first one that said how I was divine. You are divine in your awareness. That which is looking out of your eyes right now is this fundamental principle of reality. And that took a while of sitting and thinking. And you talk about emotional and being emotional. I mean, I had an experience that I've written about on my website that was very emotional. And it was showing me that everything arises out of my awareness. And it was an experience with sadness and crying and all of this. I don't have any problem showing my emotions, but this was a transformative experience. And mentioning these kinds of things is a little bit sticky because it's like every experience is a mystical experience when you really know what it is. When you really realize that everything is the divine. This is the face of the divine. It's
So
all.
you don't sense that we have idols in our life sometimes, that our life is about cleaning up all those things that maybe block or
Oh, sure. Of course.
prevent
Absolutely.
this, complete heaven, that there might be stuff that habits or
Of course.
ways of thinking or
Oh,
responding.
exactly. Ways of thinking.
Or patterns of anything that
Patterns of thinking, beliefs.
doing stuff or
Beliefs are the key. Your beliefs that are integrated into your soul are showing up all around you. Now this isn't the same thing as what's been exaggerated, in my opinion, just my opinion. This idea that I just put on the table is exaggerated to the point where you hear it in the very popular DVD, The Secret, and the books, and you can be, do, and have whatever you want. That's an exaggeration from what I think is the core truth that Seth put on the table when he says, your beliefs create your reality. Is different than saying you can have whatever you want. You're working within these limitations. Everything in form is an experience or an adventure in limitation. But it's like I talk about in my book. Limitation is often, in the New Age group especially, when they hear that word limitation, it's, oh, bad, limitation, bad. But I talk about this ukulele player. He's a virtuoso. And he fell in love with the ukulele because it was so limited. It's a little tiny thing that only has 4 strings, doesn't play very loudly, doesn't have a very big range. But he fell in love with these limitations. And so he connects with this instrument and he engages with so much passion that this love affair becomes alive in a way that is seemingly transcendent of the limitations, and yet it's fully contained by that limitation. So it is with all of the world around you. It's all an adventure in limitation. But that doesn't mean that you can't fully experience a very deep peace and joy and have all kinds of love come out of you, right? And so it is. You're like a ukulele, when I say you, in that sense, I'm talking about the person. But who you are is this ukulele player, that which composes, constructs, and builds all the ukuleles and plays all the ukuleles. So, but yes, the persons are all from a perspective of our ordinary reality. We can clearly say with validity, there are blockages, there are bumps in the roads.
To sort of purify
exactly
the stuff that, if we can see it and go through it, that doesn't need to be there. And that's what heaven is eventually, when all the stuff gets chiseled off. That it was always there, but we still are in this human dimension.
Yeah.
It has all these phases and stages.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the chiseling off is like some of the sculptors will say, the beautiful statue was there all along. I just removed what wasn't necessary, right? And have you ever used those magic eye, those colorful, they look like nothing. They look like a big mishmash of just color that have no images on them at all. And when you look at them in just the right way, they were popular around the year 2000. When you look at them in just the right way, all of a sudden you see a 3-dimensional image there. Have you ever seen these? That is very much what this is like. When you all of a sudden get it, you realize it's always been there. You just did, you saw it in the sense that the image is coming into your eye. So you saw it, but you didn't recognize it. It's always been like that. But now you have this experience where you see a three-dimensional image. And I have one of them up on my website. I didn't put it in the book because of copyright restrictions, but the example I use is a dinosaur. It's a three-dimensional dinosaur. And when you're looking at it, at first it looks like just a jumble of colors. I did this just a week or so ago when Timothy was just getting ready. We were loading up. He had the book, Magic Eye, and I hadn't seen one. And so there it is. It's very colorful, bright colors. And one of them was a pullout. And so it was about this big. And you have to put it in pretty good light. So I had to go step away. And his house had all these elephants in it. You know, and I already had mentioned to him, Timothy, how many elephants are there in your house? You know, I mean, there's statues of elephants, there's pictures of elephants, there's little tiny statuettes of elephants. And so I'm looking at this and I couldn't believe it when I saw it, it was an elephant.
Oh, wow.
And so then I gave it to him and he's like looking at it and he's like, oh, I see it. You know? And so that's the mystical experience, is when you see something that's always been there and you realize everything is God. And you go, how can it possibly be? And some of the ancient sages have said, and modern sages, in fact, a modern sage, this is Nisargadatta, who Timothy went and visited. He has the saying that says, your joys are divine and your sorrows are divine. And even if you only get half of that, if you really dig into your joys and you realize how they are divine, when you really tune into the fullness of that, you'll realize that everything is divine, including your sorrows. But if that's not comfortable for you, stay where it's reasonably comfortable. I ran track, and there were coaches that would sometimes crack the whip on people and make them do things that they didn't want to do, and it was uncomfortable. I don't think that that's very fruitful. I didn't think it was very fruitful in track, and I didn't have a coach like that. But in life, you have to have some amount of joy about your path, because it can't be that, God, every morning you're getting up and going, oh, the coach is going to crack the whip on my back and make me run the stadium stairs, or all these things you don't like, or whatever. You don't need that. How much fruit is that going to bring? Maybe for someone, for a sliver of time, it'll bring some fruit. But for the most part, you need a path that's reasonably comfortable for you, reasonably joyful for you to engage in, that you feel the love come in and go out, right? And that the peace, that you reasonably often sit in a reasonable amount of peace. So those are considered the fruit of enlightenment, the peace, the joy, the love. I just wanted to say that this is not a lesson in how to be happy all the time with a big smile.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the experiences that you have are very sad. But there's a correctness about that. There's a wholesomeness to that. There's a beauty to that, a profoundness to that. And so a friend of mine, his mother just died two days ago, and his father died 2 weeks ago, and the services are coming up, and it's like, this is, I mean, when my father passed, I cried, you know, I mean, and it wasn't a bad thing. It was the perfect, beautiful acknowledgement of the moment, of the profoundness of who he was and the love he gave, and everything about him, you know. So it's not a smile all the time. It's whatever is real, including anger, but most of the polished up sages, as they go more and more up the ladder of this wisdom, there's less and less anger or harsh judgments or things like that. But there may be tears, you know, so, but they're not, no one stands afraid of crying, you know, and
real until we're not here in this form anyway. Well, thank you so much, both of you, and gotta go, but
all right,
you.
Jeanette.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. What was your name again?
Jeanette.
Jeanette.
Yes.
Well, thanks for coming by.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
And let's put the, and God willing, we will meet again. Thank you.
All right.